I want to switch gears yet again and talk about the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh. I hope I pronounced that right. Haniyeh. He was killed by a bomb while staying in a guest house in Tehran, according to the New York Times. Earlier reports indicated that he was in fact killed by a missile strike from Israel. But just this morning, the New York Times reported that the guest house where he stayed is run and protected by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and is part of a large compound known as Neshat in an upscale neighborhood of northern Tehran. And the article in the New York Times goes on to report that according to several Middle Eastern sources, a remotely detonated bomb, was actually planted in this guest house over 2 months ago in anticipation of the Hamas leader's stay in this guest house. And it was then set off once he actually stayed in the guest house. This obviously represents kind of an incredible feat in operational capacity and intelligence. I think we've known and talked a lot about, and the media has kind of covered quite a bit about the capacity of Mossad. But I just want to kind of get your guys' reaction to this. I think that there's a bigger and important story here about the strength of Israel's intelligence and military capacity in the region and what that could mean for their posturing and their demands and their activity in the region in the months and years ahead, particularly with Netanyahu still in charge. So, Sachs, maybe you can kick us off with your thoughts on this article and Mossad's role in the assassination of this Hamas leader.
Well, there's no question that the Mossad established or reestablished its reputation for extreme competence here, being able to infiltrate Iran in order to assassinate the top political leader of Hamas while Haniyeh was a guest of Iran. I mean, that's deeply humiliating to Iran. I think he was there, Haniyeh was, for the swearing in of the new president of Iran. So for them to be able to target him while he was there and set the bomb months in advance, I mean, that shows extraordinary planning and intelligence and a huge failure on the part of Iran. I think in terms of the larger significance of this, you know, in the wake of October 7th on this pod, I said that I hope that Israel did not go off half-cocked responding the way that the United States did after 9/11. And when they started bombing Gaza, I said this is going to backfire. And, you know, boy, was that an understatement in terms of the reaction of world opinion. I mean, Israel went into Gaza, basically leveled the place, and has alienated practically the entire world. The only country that's solidly with Israel anymore is the United States. And even within the United States, roughly half the people are now against Israel. And I think what I said at the time was that Israel could pursue or should pursue a more targeted strategy the way that it did after the Munich Olympics. This assassination within Iran shows that the Munich Olympic strategy, I mean, they basically shown that it's successful. They've been able to do it. I wish they had limited their response in this more targeted way, because I think that the destruction of Gaza has created tremendous humanitarian suffering, and it's alienated just about the whole world. And what has it accomplished? I don't think they've gotten rid of Hamas. They have not been able to kill the military leader of Hamas, which is Sinwar, who was the actual military planner of the October 7th attack. And they have radicalized whatever part of the Palestinian population was not radicalized has been radicalized. And they've turned so much of the Middle East and the world against them in such a strong way that, again, I wish that they had pursued the more measured strategy. Still a tough strategy. I mean,
let me put you in Netanyahu's seat. You are leading Israel. Hamas comes into your country, attacks, kills lots of people. What is your measured response to that attack from Hamas, given the capacity you have? The Israeli Air Force, by the way, is second only to the United States. Just to give you some statistics, the Israeli Air Force has 90,000 active and reserve personnel and 614 aircraft. Israel is reported to have up to 400 nuclear weapons, and they have this extraordinary technical capacity with Mossad and operational capacity that is kind of unrivaled pretty much anywhere in the world, it seems. What do you do if you're sitting in Netanyahu's seat that provides a more kind of measured response, and how do you kind of, lead your nation?
Well, first of all, I'm not obviously sitting in that seat. I don't live in Israel, and I don't have skin in the game that way. So I think the first thing that they would say is, you're not us. You're not sitting here dealing with all of our enemies in the region, and they would have a point. But what I advocated, I think, months ago was to take a more targeted, measured strategy that I think the assassination of Haniyeh shows that they could have executed. And I understand why they went into Gaza and why they felt they needed to go into Gaza, but this is not an anti-Israel statement. It's just a questioning of the strategy. I just don't see that it's produced much good. I don't think they've solved their Hamas problem. They have not gotten Sinwar, and they've lost a meaningful amount of global support.
Yeah. Chamath, do you have a read?
I think that it was, in hindsight, a pretty big miscalculation by Netanyahu to pursue the strategy that they did. And I would have much preferred what you're seeing now, which is a very targeted approach. I think it preserves, and it would have preserved, not just world political support, but just individual people's support, where instead of going into Gaza, leveling the place, creating all of this death and destruction, and amplifying and confusing people, where they now all of a sudden had to make a decision between these two groups and now get confused with anti-Semitic sentiment. That should never have happened. It's clear that Mossad is incredibly competent and incredibly capable. I do believe that sovereign countries have the right to defend themselves. But then there was a bridge too far, and I think the Israeli government has crossed it. In hindsight, and I think I told you this story, and I may have relayed this in confidence, but I'll just say it again. On October the 8th, what was offered, and I'm not going to say by who, was sort of a meeting of the right political leadership from the Middle East, Israel, and the United States, where they were all willing to sort of come. And the idea would have been to extend some sort of structured solution for the Palestinian people. Now, that would have been so unintuitive and unexpected. I think everybody would have been a little bit on their heels, but I think what it would have done is it would have cast Netanyahu in an incredible light. It would have cast Israel in an incredible light. They would have still preserved the ability to go and kill the individual leaders that they wanted to, but it was rejected. And I think that when we look back, these are the kinds of decisions that hopefully history documents accurately so that folks who are in the seat, to your point, Freeberg, the next time around can make a different calculation. You see the pictures, and there's just no way that you can turn them off. You know what I mean?
I think Israel's biggest asset is probably also their biggest liability, which is their military and intelligence strength. And it emboldens them in a way that they can be more aggressive than perhaps they need to be with respect to maintaining the security of the state, but perhaps being vengeful and vindictive. And I know that that's a very controversial statement to be made. I want to underscore the strength of this military and this intelligence. Do you guys remember the Stuxnet worm from a number of years ago?
Yeah.
That story was incredible. Yeah. And the New York Times broke this story in 2012. Stuxnet was a malicious computer worm, and I'm reading off of Wikipedia because there's a lot of reporting that has different opinions on this, that was first uncovered in 2010 and was thought to have been in development since at least 2005. Now, this computer worm was supposedly developed by Mossad and the NSA, and it was a malicious computer worm that ultimately allowed intrusion into the control systems of the centrifuges of Iran's uranium refining systems. And they basically were then able to make those centrifuges go haywire and destroy themselves. And they did this over and over for several years. And the Iranians could not figure out what was going on or why. They kept it completely secret. Ultimately, it was revealed that there was this operation organized by the United States called Operation Olympic Games. That was a cyber disruption operation, and that Mossad had a critical role in.
By the way, there are two other stories that build on top of this that are tangential but related. One is that there was a nuclear engineer that Israel felt should be unlit. And the way that they did it was via some like remote control machine gun that they planted off of like a highway where the car egressed off the highway. And then all of a sudden the thing was shot up. A different example was there's a story about how they figured out that Yasser Arafat was sick because they were able to collect a stool sample from a pipe that left his home. And they were able to kind of diagnose that A, it was his tool, and then B, he had some chronic illness. My point, I think, in all of this is kind of where you're going, which is that when you have such capability and such precision, to go to the other end of the spectrum, you really have to be sure that you're right. And, as Zach said, I think we're looking back and it's clear that the support around the world, it just isn't there for that kind of mass casualty and that kind of
if Israel could actually destroy Hamas and achieve its military objective in Gaza, that'd be one thing. But I think we've seen that that's impossible. I mean, Hamas basically bleeds in with the population. It's indistinguishable. And the leadership is hidden deep underground. And the Israelis have not been able to root them out. Again, Sinwar has not been found. And so you've destroyed Gaza, but you have not achieved your objective of eliminating Hamas. And in the process, you've deeply alienated
No, I mean, it's just
most of the world,
just like,
and you made the situation worse, basically.
It's like the Russians and the Americans trying to chase the Taliban in Afghanistan forever. This is not a group of individuals that once they're gone, everything is fixed.
Everything's just worse. I mean, you still have the same problem. In fact, now the entire Palestinian population is radicalized. In fact, the whole Arab and Muslim population in the Middle East is more radicalized against you than they were before. I mean, I know there was already a significant amount of hatred, but now it's worse. And you haven't fundamentally solved the underlying issue. I think the 9/11 analogy is apt. I mean, we went off after 9/11 half-cocked into all these wars in the Middle East. I think that going into Afghanistan, that was justified because they were harboring al-Qaeda. But then we went into Iraq because really members of the Bush administration had a pre-existing agenda, and then they lied us into it, saying that Saddam was connected somehow to 9/11. And we began a 20-year process of just plunging ourselves into all of these wars. It only made everything worse. One of the reasons why Iran is in such a strong position today in the Middle East is because we took out Iraq. We basically created a power vacuum in the Middle East that they ended up filling.
I recently heard that after Israel struck the embassy in Damascus a few months ago, you may remember this, Iran launched a counterattack. And you remember there were all these drones that they sent, hundreds of them, into Israel. But there was supposedly a forewarning that these drones were on the way. There was notice given, and it was like, this is it. This is our proportional response, and we're done.
That's right.
What I heard was that Netanyahu did not want to stop. He wanted to escalate after that response from Iran. Now, that coupled with what's going on in the West Bank right now, where there is a restricted movement of Palestinians within the West Bank and continued development of Jewish settlements, I think really represents a major risk to the region, the Middle East region, that we could see an escalation beyond the response that may be mandated or necessary to secure the state that makes things much, much worse in the region and could isolate Israel even further and ultimately draw a lot of powers to that region to try and figure out what side are you on and how do we resolve this? And that could lead to something much bigger and much nastier. So I think while we all observe this and watch this, the behavior of the targeted attack in Hamas, for me, it's not the issue as much as indicating the capacity of this military and this intelligence. That means that they probably feel highly emboldened to take whatever steps individuals feel are necessary to secure the state for the long run, which could mean an increased escalation in conflict. And that's, I think, a real kind of point of concern. And that's one of the black swan events, I think, that's still outstanding right now. Because if that does happen, if there is, for example, an unraveling of the West Bank, you could see one of these sorts of events that everyone gets drawn like a magnet to the Middle East. And you end up with a major global conflict that becomes a problem for markets. It becomes a problem for the world. And that could be the catalyzing event that I don't think any of us want to see.
To use your logic from before, the thing that may plunge the world into having to have a point of view on this may actually be a political calculus that Netanyahu has to engage in, which is around keeping small factions of his coalition government in place, which may not actually represent the full view of the Israeli people. That's what's even more tragic. So it's not, obviously the Palestinians don't want it, but many Israelis may not want it either. And there may be no avenue if he wants to remain in power. And that's what's so scary.
Look, I think there's no question that we're on a path here where we could have a regional war in the Middle East. Remember that after Israel hit the Iranian general in Lebanon, the Iranians responded 2 weeks later with that massive drone and missile attack. Most of the missiles were intercepted by Iron Dome, and I think America participated in that as well. I think 1 or 2 of them got through. And then Israel launched kind of a weak missile attack on Iran, and that was kind of the final word on it. There were people in Netanyahu's cabinet, like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, sort of the more hardline, radical right-wingers, who I think publicly tweeted that they thought Israel's final word on it was weak, and they clearly wanted to do more. So I think the point is just that when we had this last exchange between Israel and Iran, it felt like it was on the verge of tipping over into a regional war. But I think partly due to the efforts of the United States, we were able to help tamp that down. I think now Iran's promising revenge for what just happened in Tehran, and this could set that escalatory spiral off again.
Totally.
If you were to place odds on this, I'd say it's at least 50-50 that things escalate into a regional war.
It's not as much of a black swan. Yeah. And by the way, there's no such thing as a regional war in the Middle East because every one of those countries has significant allies in Russia, in the United States, in China. What is Saudi Arabia going to do? Jordan is going to end up in a situation where they may end up having to defend the Palestinians in the West Bank, which puts them across the shooting field from the Israelis. And the United States is an ally to both Israel and Jordan. What are we going to end up doing? And that's why this whole situation is not just about a regional conflict. It actually draws the whole world back to the Middle East and in a real kind of escalatory scenario.
This is why the counterfactual of what could have happened on October 8th is so important, because that would have been UAE, United States, Saudi,
Qatar was involved,
and Israel. No, just those 4. And let's put Qatar in the mix as well. But my point is, my gosh, that it could have rewritten world history in such a profound way. It would have just taken some restraint and proportionality.
Turn the cheek the other way, kind of.
Yeah, it would require incredible forbearance on the part of a population that had just been attacked with massive atrocities on civilians.
But not just this attack, under attack for generations in a region that has been all about conflict and secularity and all of the kind of, identity drivers that make this so deeply personal and rooted in history, not just in a moment or an event.
Look, when it happened to us on 9/11, we lashed out,
Yeah, exactly.
But the results were not good.
Yeah. Well, look, let's move on. I'm not trying to judge anyone's behavior. I'm just trying to shine a light on the strength of Israel's capacity and what that may mean for their proclivity for escalatory behavior, which is really scary given that this is not just a regional issue. It becomes a global issue when it does happen. Sorry, go ahead, Shimon.
I thought you were going somewhere else with it, which is I was just going to say, in any other simulation, the capability of the Mossad is fodder for incredible movies. It's out of a movie.
Right.
You read these articles and they just don't seem like they're real.
Incredible.
It's what do you mean you smuggle the bomb into the safe house in Iran where all the VIPs stay?
2 months ago. 2 months ago.
2 months ago. How does that happen? What does it mean that you actually develop? Then sit tight. What does it mean that you developed a virus that you were able to get into the actual working computers of the Iranian
control units? By the way, the control
complex.
Units. Yeah, the control boards.
Which means that
equipment made by Siemens that was shipped to Iran. Yeah,
that's not like you telnet into something. You know what I mean? That means that there was a person physically there that then found a way to essentially get this firmware implanted. And it's
no,
this
you know what
insane.
happened? I remember the story. They actually did not. What happened was they let the virus circulate in the world for years before someone randomly had it on a USB drive that didn't know they had it, randomly plugged it into a computer in the centrifuge facility. Then it infected, sent out a notice, I'm in here. And then after years, it was finally in there through the random movement of this virus that no one... Isn't that incredible? Anyway.
That's incredible.
Yeah. Let's wrap up with the Bill Ackman story.
Sorry, before you do that.
Yep.
I hate to make this political, but I just have to observe. Look at this situation in the world. The Middle East is on the verge of regional war. We could be in a war there. I should say there could be a regional war there. by January 20th, when the next president is sworn in. You've got the United States in a proxy war with Ukraine. You have major tensions with China in East Asia. I mean, is this really the time where you want to put in place an inexperienced president whose policy positions are unclear, who's untested, was never even tested by a primary, who the media refuses to test now, who's basically a media construct? This seems to me like a really bad idea.
All right. So political pitch in from David Sachs. We don't have Jake out here to give the other side, but let's keep going.